Yeah. So this is Mattermost here. So at what point did they start to become kind of ideas? When we really looked at that point where something goes from just being a conversation to, you guys would know this, when it starts to become an idea that we go, oh, it's the HoloChat idea. That's the one we'll do. We'll start building that, right? So we can give it kind of a working title, and then it starts going into more of our structured tools. Like after we've kind of given a bit more form and maybe gotten some kind of product leadership behind it. So then, we were looking at, well, we didn't want to rework GitHub issues. I mean, there's plenty of information in there in the open source community about what people are working on, but there's this big kind of chasm between that conversation and then when it gets into GitHub or for us in organizations, Jira. And then, what's the point of doing something like this as well on, kind of blockchain technology? So I think we wanted to use something that is kind of unique, like a unique feature to the blockchain world. So we used a touch of the kind of DAO concept. So that stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And that's where, just to kind of simplify it down, we have rules around how we're going to make decisions, and instead of us humans having to implement the rules, it's automated and programmed through the technology, and it runs exactly as we've coded it, right? So that's, I work a lot with like the Ethereum platform, smart contracts. That's a lot about what it does, but a lot of people use that for organizational governance, which is kind of a risky thing to start to do with an emerging technology. But we wanted to use that with feature backlog prioritization and see what kind of happens with that. And it gives us an ability to actually plug in different governance patterns and kind of try them out and say, okay, if we applied, I don't know, let's say a Wisdom model or different kinds of models, what would happen? How would that actually order our backlog?
And the pluggable governance model, that's actually one of the things built into Holochain already. We have this idea of mix-ins, similar to CSS mix-ins, where you make some code and you can use it in your code. It's actually a whole pluggable governance system, so you can work out how does your community want to operate and how are you going to make decisions. You can plug that into your messaging app, which is really cool. All right, I think...
So what we demoed, the tiny thing that we prototyped, is we thought about this scenario where you're in a messaging app like Mattermost or Slack, and you're having a conversation and an idea is born.
Exactly.
So take it away.
All right, so at Elaborate, we will have working software, right? So here we go, some working software. So this is Mattermost. This is where 99.9% of our community is talking about what they want to do and why they're involved with Holochain and that sort of thing. So what I wanted to do was slowly over time is replace this with our own technology, which we're going to call HoloChat. But we wanted to get that idea of surfacing ideas, because as you can see here, you can't actually, you've got threads and that sort of thing, but there's no real way of saying, well, that's a really cool idea, let's do something with that. So what we did was, you can see this is mostly looking like HoloChat, like Slack, same kind of idea, because that's a good UX, people like using that. And the concept is we have some teams down the left side here. And each of those teams, you have channels, so you can have public channels and private channels and direct messages, all the kind of normal stuff you'd expect in a messaging app. And then at the top here, we've got, what do we call that? Data personalization?
Yeah, we've got some ability to kind of surface information that might be relevant to you.
And the concept of that was that when people join an open source community or when they come and join a project team that's already going, like you literally flap around like a fish out of water until you figure out how the whole thing works, right? Because there's no real hand-holding. Most of the time people are too busy, or they go and read this or go and read that, and you have to figure out who you can ask and that sort of thing. So what we wanted to do here was say, right, if let's say I joined the community and I used my GitHub account to like hook up to it, so you got some sort of idea, you can see what sort of things I like doing, and then we were going to try and say, well, maybe you should go and read this and learn how to, or like read this white paper to figure out how this app works or how the community works too. And then once you got involved, the idea was that it told you when things happen. So let's say we're having a conversation and somebody said, well, that was a really good idea, let's turn that into an idea. Well, I get notified. And then, okay, so now it's an idea, what should I do next? Well, I should go and learn how to be a product owner, right? So that's what those two things at the top are. And down the middle, we've got your normal chat application with the ability to write replies. And you can do mouse up, thumbs ups and thumbs downs, as we all love doing. And we'll have some emojis on here soon and hashtags and that sort of thing. But as you can see, they're just one-liners, so they're not really that interesting. But what we've got here is, this is a bit more interesting. There's threads and somebody's put mock-ups here and that sort of thing. So some sort of threshold, we're not sure what that's going to be yet. But the idea is that the software goes, well, actually, this could be an idea. You know, there's enough activity around this thing, let's make it an idea. Hence we have the lovely light bulb, because everybody loves light bulbs for ideas. And the concept is you can click that, and then what will happen is it'll turn up in this new ideas list down the bottom here. And what that means is it's gone from this unstructured, semi-structured conversation, images and that sort of thing into, let's add a bit more context to that. So what you would do is come over here and click the plus sign. And it says, okay, well, this is a new idea. Let's add some more things to it. It's a bit more structured data, like, you know, why should we build it? Tell me why we're going to build it. Who's going to own it? And give us a description of how it works as an idea, right? So let's imagine that that's been done on our new idea by Art Brock, who's the founder of Holochain, by the way. So his idea has now got enough structured details to become a more detailed idea, or top idea that we're actually going to work on. So if we hit the light bulb again, because it's really clever, you can now see that that idea has turned into a more structured idea, a bit more context around it. And, you know,
if I can add
sure,
in there. So
yeah.
if you see what we're doing, kind of taking it from like conversation to, it's maybe an idea with just a little bit of a working title, but that gives it the ability to kind of upvote or downvote it, or kind of increase the popularity of the idea. And then at the same time, it's kind of increasing its form and going kind of from that rough looking, sketchy looking idea to something that's actually got the integrations in it, so kind of moving through the Kanban.
Which is before we get to Kanban.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of, is this worth actually looking at? And now it's got enough context around it to say, well, let's look at that. And Gendry's going to talk more about how we're going to stack these things using a bit more AI kind of background metrics and that sort of thing. And what I really like, I think this was your idea actually, the lead time in the top right there. We can use Craig's product Maslow to actually go and interrogate whatever system that we're using. And in this case, we're using GitHub to go and say, well, you know, it's probably going to take at least 3 weeks for this thing to get built based on how fast other things have been getting built, that kind of idea. And then, you know, we've got things like, you know, well, what is this thing? I don't know. I don't have any context around it, so I want to see what this idea is. You could then go and see, this is the conversation, or this is how it got to here. So these things need more work, but this is the general concept. And then we say, okay, well, this item is now so good. Let's actually go and put it into GitHub. So we hit the GitHub button. And now it's an item in GitHub that can be tracked normally, you know, like Kanban boards and all that kind of thing. So it's gone from this initial conversation to a bit more structure, to a bit more structure, to a bit more, to actually an item that can now be tracked down the road. And that is the demo of working software.
Is there any questions? Like we've been pretty close to this, so yeah.
Do you see organisations that want to get closer to their customers, allowing their customers to get through chats and forums and bits and pieces, allowing that to be sort of part of this, part of the path to move?
Yeah, so part of the actual product development.
Yeah, so having the voice of the customer, so many voices of the customer straight away.
Yeah, so just for the video, the question was, do we see that other people outside the development team are literally contributing to this? Absolutely. And that's where a lot of the context gets lost. You know, you go and talk to the customer and you write stuff down on a pad or Evernote or whatever, and then you have to go to a product backlog meeting 5 days later. Right? And you've got to try and remember what did they want, and that kind of that organic surfacing of ideas gets lost a lot of the time, and that's what we're trying to solve. We're trying to fix here.
There's also an opportunity to push your internal metrics about what's successful around that sort of feasible, viable, desirable. I think what your strategic objectives are, what is considered to be where the product wants to go, back to the consumers as well.
Yes.
So that they can continually iterate on that conversation. to help you have more conversations around what it is you're trying to achieve with the product, and then maybe give direct feedback about whether those metrics are actually correct or not?
There's a lot of possibility to kind of open it up a lot more. And I guess what we're kind of trying to do is bring in more of the integration and the evolution of that early stage idea through the place where people are talking already, but it doesn't mean you couldn't open it up to more people. That's funny because there's a few tools and products out there at the moment who, is it User Voice, is that one?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, yeah, that's one of the ones. Looking at Ben because are there any other good ones that kind of use
that much chat integration stuff to do testing, but there's lots of it's quite a big thing.
Yeah, there's lots of people that are involving their users in I guess prioritizing the backlog. But it doesn't really integrate it all the way through. Yeah.
We have another question, and something slightly sideways as well. I might have missed it earlier on in the conversation, but so the use of blockchain and so forth, you were talking about earlier around how you're trying to bring the data back into the people who own the data, to give them their own identity and so forth. So
Glad you asked.
I'll move on. So what I thought I'd go next into is that's kind of that's the prototype we built. But then, of course, as part of this, just like you're asking questions is, okay, well this is kind of one thing that feels useful. What else could we do? Yeah. So what else could we imagine? So we started with kind of the what would how would you actually approach this? Because I think thinking about what are the tiny steps you would take forward. So I think the first one is thinking a bit meta about it. So the first HoloChat community should be the HoloChat community, and the first feature to kind of implement is that feature prioritization of the HoloChat community's backlog, right? So thinking about kind of starting there, and then if you're thinking about adoption, how do you actually start to make the messaging app useful enough for people from Mattermost in that Holochain community to actually start coming across and building out kind of the feature set there for a bit of an MVP. But starting to add other things like we had lead time in there, but forecasting. These are things that are important in terms of product development decisions around the backlog. Or one that I think would be really cool is you actually get to kind of experiment with different governance patterns or different kind of DAOs. So it could be like a dictatorship model where you get to be the dictator for the day, or which is the top, or dictator for the sprint, which is going to be the top idea that we're going to prioritize at the backlog, or using emojis in a democratic way to have like an emoji democracy. Or like liquid democracy, where we start to play a little bit more with concepts that sound really good in theory, but how do they actually work in practice in a safe environment of our feature backlog, where really all it's doing at the moment is just sorting which are going to be the most important ideas for us to work on next, rather than how we're going to manage and run our entire organization, and whatever decisions we make will be followed through. So they're kind of just a few, but in the context of HoloChat. And then we started thinking a bit more about, well, you could use some of these concepts outside of Holochain and on HoloChat as well. So I think where you're going, Risto, with is, you could use it inside organizations or even wider across open source and distributed communities. But I liked one of the ideas we came up with is like the Scrum Master bot. So we've got a lot of ceremonies, but they could be conversational digital ceremonies. I think some teams that do this in a distributed way probably use some of these already anyway. So, I've got an example there of, a bot kind of just asking you those questions, what did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And any blockers? And I think that's kind of cute maybe, but it starts to get really interesting once we apply some of the data-driven personalization around that. So we had that kind of banner on the top where you could say, this is the idea that maybe you're the product leader for, and this is currently blocked due to this reason. Or what else do we have? Oh yeah, the integration with GitHub. these are the features that have recently been released that you were a part of creating.
And that integration doesn't have to be with like Jira or GitHub. Like the idea was some sort of conversation has happened, and that is an idea. It could be like, well, that's a really good idea. I want to make that into a blog post. So you could make a button that like sends out that information as like the framework for your blog post, or a training course, or something like that. So the idea is that all these conversations that we have, which is why they say agile is face-to-face, is one of the things in the manifesto, doesn't necessarily have to be face-to-face. They say face-to-face because a lot of context gets lost. If we build a system like this, that context hopefully won't get lost, and we can use it for lots of different outputs.
And then another one we started looking at, which I think is a unique part of this technology, is, okay, so Phil was talking a little bit about the data aspect of what's happening with these messaging platforms. So one of the things that we can do with data in this kind of technology is we can allow people to actually govern the use of their own data and make decisions about who do they want to see which different parts of it. And I think that, I feel like that's almost like a prerequisite, but then you can start to get really interesting data visualizations, but also insights. And if you can trust that you own and can govern your data, maybe you feel more comfortable with putting more data into these platforms and can start to kind of orchestrate that maybe for yourself, but also within communities, and start to kind of integrate that with some of the things like GitHub and Jira. And I'm pretty sure there'll be some really interesting insights there to find.
One of the things I really liked about your idea was that this is a small community at the moment, right? But I worked with a community called .NET Nuke, and we had hundreds of thousands of people, right? Can you imagine trying to be a core developer, trying to keep up with a forum of 100,000 people, right? You can't do it. So the idea was that like you'd have like a history. It's like, Phil likes working on React. So when things come up in the forum, people talking about a particular thing, maybe we'll say, hey Phil, have you seen this interesting message thread that's happening? That kind of idea. You don't see that happening at the moment. So with this system, we can start to do that kind of thing. So you can say, here's my profile. You do that. Use it for good rather than advertising in the community. Yes, Risto.
Just one other question as well. When you're developing a product like this as well, as far as using Holochain as a technology, as a platform, what are the advantages of using Holochain for doing this type of work or for work in general?
So the question was, what's the advantage of using Holochain? Because it's built as a decentralized platform, which means you can go through the tube, what's it called? I forgot the train system.
Which one? Oh, the tube.
The loop, that's right, the city loop.
Loop.
Go through the city loop, completely disconnected, doesn't matter, because this works as a local app all the time, and if you're connected, then it does stuff. But it's a local app, right? So you don't have to rely on being connected to someone's server all the time. Plus, all your data is written locally, and only the stuff that you want to publish as public gets spread out into the distributed hash table. And it also means that every time a new person starts using an app and brings their computing resources to the network goes faster, because you can't use all the resources on your computer, right? Even if I did all video and ran all the audio apps and everything I have at once, there's still CPU and bandwidth and everything left over because these machines are unreal, right? So every time someone connects, you add more resources to the network. So kind of like scalability is like inversely an issue here. Like the more people that use it, the less scalability issues it will be.
I think more specifically for this use case, because there's a few different distributed technologies now, and I'm less familiar with Holochain, but more familiar with things like Ethereum, for example. You get some things that in different use cases are more appealing, maybe when you build them on the chain as opposed to in any of the other technologies that we have. And I don't know what you think about this one, but I think the two that make this use case really interesting is the fact that you've got that difference in how your data is managed. And then I think the other one is you've got this ability to kind of program the decision making, around your backlog prioritization using this technology, which maybe is a little bit of an experimentation in how you could do that for a much broader scale of that, because maybe people don't freak out so much if your backlog's not exactly prioritized the way that you all agreed up front. But for bigger decisions, that level of trust that you get from this technology would be required. So I think it's almost like a stepping stone to understanding use cases around the decentralized autonomous organization.
And I think the pluggable governance is also a really, really big thing. That ability to say, in this community we use these rules, this chat is these rules, so you can plug in the different, and that's built to do that.
So that's what we had to present. Yeah?
Yep, that's us.
But feel free to ask questions, and if you want to look a bit more at the demo, Phil knows the parts of it that are like proper working.